Welcome to Lieven and Marcelo's Criminology podcast, a podcast hosted by Marcelo Aevi from the University of Lausanne, Switzerland, and Lieven Pauwels from Ghent University, Belgium. We aim to draw a map of the state of criminology across Europe through the words of contemporary criminologists. How is criminology defined and taught? Which are the main lines of research? Which are the main schools of thought in each country? These and many other questions are answered here by fellow researchers who share their vision on the development of criminology in their countries from its beginnings to the second decade of the 21st century. If you want to know and compare their stories, stay tuned.
Today we are interviewing Ian van Dijk. Ian van Dijk is professor of victimology and human security at Tilburg University in the Netherlands. He holds a degree in law from Leiden University and a PhD in criminology from the University of Nijmegen. Ian van Dijk was the former director of the Research and Documentation Center of the Dutch Ministry of Justice and Security. Under his supervision, programs of policy-oriented research were launched on alternative sanctions, victims' rights, crime prevention and organized crime. He later acted as director of the strategic policy planning at the same ministry. He played a major role in the development of the International Crime Victim Survey, the ICVS, together with, amongst others, Mayhew and Martin Killias. This interview was conducted on the 28th of March 2023.
Welcome, Ian van Dijk. It's really a pleasure to have you here today.
Welcome, Ian van Dijk. It's an honor to have you as our guest in our podcast.
It's my pleasure altogether.
Great. So let us start with the first question we ask everybody, and that question is related to how one would define criminology as it exists in the Netherlands. Or maybe the Netherlands is too small. What's your opinion about this?
Well, yes, in the Netherlands, it has become very much empirical science. If I have to define criminology in the Netherlands, I would like to go back a little bit in history, because I think we can see some very clear trends over the past 50 years. When I was a student at Leiden University with Professor Nagel, it was a auxiliary science of criminal law. So there were criminal law professors, and some of them had a bit of interest in criminology. And very often it was actually the professor of criminal law who was also teaching criminology on the side, so to speak. Van Bemmelen in Leiden was famous for that. But then in the late 60s, early 70s, critical criminology really became suddenly very, very fashionable. Some of the professors, Bianchi, Hulsman, they started to argue for the reduction or even total abolition of the criminal justice system. So the Dutch criminologists went very far. I think they were a little bit more extreme, for instance, than critical criminology in the UK. And that was really a flame in the pan. It became they became public figures. They gave lectures everywhere. They were on the media very frequently, and that of course gave a lot of profile to criminology, and all of a sudden they were no longer the assistants of the criminal law professor, because they were public figures. And as these things go, universities are very opportunistic. Suddenly, all universities wanted to have an institute of criminology, because that was a way to show you were a progressive, open-minded university. And then you see around 1970 that you see criminology institutes popping up everywhere. The Free Amsterdam opened the Wonger Institute. I myself was recruited by Nijmegen, totally new institute. with lots of interest and lots of support. I think there was no university left that didn't have a criminological institute. So they had about 10 years. They were very, very successful. It was mainly dominated by critical criminology, and you could also say there was very little interest in crime. There was mainly interest in criticizing criminal justice. So the studies were about discrimination, class discrimination, gender discrimination, and there was hardly any interest left in causes of crime, and certainly not in personalities of that would be a risk factor for a criminal behavior. That was no longer a topic. But then what happened parallel to these enthusiastic conferences about the need to abolish the criminal justice system, common crime in the Netherlands went up by 10% per year. And it became also a very topical issue, but for quite other reasons. It became a problem for the middle classes. And also feminists started to raise the issue of domestic rape crisis centers, shelter homes. Already in 1972, I think the first shelter home was opened in Amsterdam. And that was difficult to reconcile with this exclusive discourse about how can we abolish criminal justice system. The feminists didn't agree with that position, and the big political parties didn't agree. So in the early 80s, it became clear for the Ministry of Justice that they needed help. They needed new ideas how to address this fear of crime issue. And the critical criminologists didn't deliver, because the truth is they didn't know very much about crime, because they had not studied crime in their careers. So it's a very strange situation that crime was a top issue, and criminology was very popular, but it was not interested in crime. And that's what happened then. And this is maybe not totally unique for the Netherlands, because the same has happened in the UK, that the government in the Netherlands, the Ministry of Justice, in London, the Home Office, felt this need. We need advice from social scientists, because this is a social phenomenon. It's not a legal issue. And so at the Home Office, Ron Clark was invited to set up the Research and Planning Unit. And almost in the same year, Wouter Boekhuizen, the professor of criminology at Groningen, was invited to set up an in-house research center at the rather conservative Ministry of Justice. And he invited some young generation of social scientists. And this included Eugene Junger, but also myself, Dato Steenhuis. And I must also admit, suddenly there were funds to do all kinds of studies. So Dutch criminology became very much policy oriented. First it was critical, then it became policy oriented. So we were not really theory oriented criminologists, but we were interested in crime as a social problem. And of course, assistance to victims is comes up very naturally. If you are focusing on crime, you are also focusing on the receiving end of crime, the victim. So these became suddenly the topics. And then criminology was maybe a little bit less in the media, but it became really extraordinarily influential in policy making in the Netherlands, probably even more than in the UK. So the Research and Documentation Center of the Ministry of Justice, which was already at the time quite a big center with a staff of 40, at least 40, maybe even 50 researchers, which is still big, also to the current standards. They were also invited to join committees that drafted legislation, or in the mid-80s drafted a comprehensive policy plan how to tackle crime, called Society and Crime. That was, I can say without exaggerating, really the fruit of the research and documentation center at the ministry. We were the drafters of that policy plan, and it was a criminologically based policy plan for the first time, I guess, in the history of Dutch criminal policies. And that was another peak in Dutch criminology. It was also criticized because it was indeed very much focused on advising the government how to tackle crime and assist victims. So, of course, there is room to criticize that exclusive focus. It dominated very much the discourse and the publications in the journal and so on and so forth. Then what happened is that Wouter Buikhuizen, the same Wouter Buikhuizen, became a little bit bored with his success at the ministry and felt, I have these young Turks now, and they can do it themselves. And we felt the same. So he decided to go back to academia and set up a very interesting research center at Leiden University, focusing on biosocial research. So he wanted to bring in the medical sciences. He was also interested in the psychophysiological factors, and as certainly Lieven will know, as a neighbor, this created enormous outcry in the leftish or left media, and really this was really huge. The criticism was that he was a neo-Lombroso, and actually that he was a fascist who wanted to bring back Nazi kind of criminology. I'm not exaggerating. These were the terms that were used, Lieven. You will have heard about that.
Yeah, I remember the columns by Piet Grijs,
Yes.
who were very much, very, very strongly criticizing his work as being a neo-Nazi. And basically he wanted to, if I remember the discussion, and I read the book he wrote, it's on biosocial interactions. He just wanted to introduce the ideas of Mednick, who was a psychologist.
Yes.
And there was nothing deterministic about it. But of course, if you think of the history of biology, you can understand the fear, but you should read the plans before starting a moral panic, I would say. But of course, that's easy to say so many years afterwards, because if I'm not mistaken, Buikhuizen was, after all, rehabilitated. I don't remember when.
Yeah, great. Well, he was certainly he got a medal from the Queen, and the university organized a big seminar for him.
Okay.
But let's say before we need to talk about what happened, because that campaign had serious consequences.
Exactly. It was, and it's not just the media, not just the journalists. But Piet Grijs himself was a professor at the University of Amsterdam in IT, in mathematics, in computer science, and there were also some professors, including the professor of the Free University, Herman Bianchi, one of the radicals, who openly took sides with Piet Grijs against, basically also accusing Wouter of being a kind of a neo-Nazi. Really awful things have happened, and many other criminologists were scared shitless. They felt, oh, this is such a big outcry. I keep out of this. So there was also a lot of treason. At least that's my recollection. A lot of cowardice. But it also had what happened was that he was forced to resign. So he couldn't do his research. The Child Protection Office, everyone said, that man will never enter our premises. with his research. So he couldn't do his research. There was an awful atmosphere also at the university, a lot of opposition, cowardice. So after a few years, he decided to become an antique dealer. And that was the end of his career, because there was no comeback.
An antique dealer, eh? Buick Huizen, for those who are listening, because the name, as you pronounce it, is difficult to catch if they want to see the history. So he became an specialist in antiquities, and I think he went to live to Spain, or am I wrong about that?
Correct. After he was about an antique dealer for about 10 years, and then he and his new wife went to Spain. But for medical reasons, they came back later to the Netherlands. So he still lives in the Netherlands now. But he has been in Spain for about 10 years, I think. Yes,
so
correct.
This was a campaign by the radical left, a sort of cancel culture before the hour. Eh? It's similar what is happening nowadays in some places. And they managed to destroy the life and the career of the person. Eh?
Absolutely. But the side effect of all this, because we are not going into the history of this tragic history of the man, but it had an enormous impact on criminology in the Netherlands. You can imagine that no other university would ever think for a second to set up a similar institute. It was a total disaster for Leiden University. So criminology went in decline at the universities. It was a bit a guilty topic all of a sudden. So, for instance, Nijmegen, the institute in Nijmegen, where I have started my career before joining the Ministry of Justice, was closed, and many other institutes had very reduced staff. So we went really in a rapid decline, and also the atmosphere in the community. Science is also dependent on communities. The Society of Criminology was completely in a civil war. I gave up my membership. I withdrew. Yes.
You are now talking about the Dutch Society of Criminology.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Yeah. We couldn't have nice meetings together anymore because of this trauma and this fight.
Which is the year, more or less, around?
1990.
Okay.
A bit earlier already, but I mean by 1990 it was all over.
Okay.
He had resigned and it was finished. Now, what happened then? Some people decided that it was unbalanced, that you had a still prospering in-house center at the ministry, but criminology was almost brain dead at the universities. So the Dutch Society for Science, for Fundamental Science, consulted with the Ministry of Justice. Shouldn't we launch a new university-based criminological institute? And that became NSCR, first founded in Leiden and now at Free University in Amsterdam. So it was again a really a policy decision of the Dutch establishment, that they said, okay, we have the research and documentation center at the ministry, but there must also be criminology at the universities, and that needs to be given a financial boost. And that's what happened. So if you now look at Dutch criminology, it is again university-based, because many of the people who worked at NSCR have become professors. They got the opportunity to become internationally credible researchers, and then they got chairs elsewhere. So you see a renaissance of academic criminology. Now, if you ask me what is Dutch criminology, then I would say it is very much empirical criminology, more than in many other countries where there is a theoretical paradigm that it needs to be theory based. We don't have that so much in the Netherlands, because the policy oriented research of people like Josine Junger and myself was very empirical, because we had to to explain to the politicians what is crime, what can you do about crime. And I think the victimization surveys that I launched with many of the ministry and that Josine did with the self-report delinquency studies are very typical for that era in criminology. NSCR has continued that empirical tradition. I think it would really be challenging for them to, if you would ask them what is your theoretical orientation, I think you get many answers, because they do excellent empirical research. It is methodologically, I think, top rate. That's also why it is published in the top journals. But there is very little of value. It is very solid, innovative empirical research. I don't see a theoretical school for the moment. And that is to sum up, to make a long story short, Dutch criminology for various reasons has now emerged as a strong empirical discipline on its own right, very well rooted in the universities, and we still also have the in-house research center, but it doesn't have the position it had 30 years ago. It is again criminology, yeah. It's also at three universities. It's a very popular course. We have many bachelors, like in Belgium and in England, and many master students, unbelievably more than there were 40 years ago. So in that respect, you can say it has been a success story eventually, because some of the popularity of the critical criminology, it has survived. It is still a popular course at several universities. For instance, to bring it back a little bit to me, I did a textbook on criminology in 1990 or 1991. There was no textbook at the moment. We are now working on the 12th edition. That is also, I think, evidence that the discipline is prosperous. Otherwise, the publisher wouldn't start asking for new editions. That's clear. So that's a good sign, I think.
Yeah. So just for the listeners, when you talk about the Research and Documentation Center, many times it's known by the Dutch abbreviation WODC, which corresponds to the name in Dutch, which I will not try to pronounce. So just WODC, and then the other institute that you mentioned is NSCR, which is the Netherlands Center for Research.
So crime and law enforcement. Yes.
Crime and law enforcement. Yeah, I'm supposed to know that because I'm head of the International Advisory Committee, so exactly. I should be able to pronounce it the right way, the long way. So, and still the Research and Documentation Center is active, but a little bit less than in the days, because at that time, the WODC, you were there and Josine was also there for a long time,
She was my successor, yes, as a director.
Okay. So you were first there, and then Josine entered the field. At that time, the WODC played a major role also in the development of victimization surveys.
And the self-report delinquency survey of Josine. Yes, I agree. That is something that, I remember Braithwaite once told me when I met him. He said, how come such a little country does all these comparative studies? And then I answered him, well, that's exactly why we also have big publishing houses in the Netherlands, like Kluwer and Elsevier, because their own market was rather limited. So they went international. We became convinced this is so interesting, a victimization survey. Why not do it in other countries as well?
But how did it happen, this development of because first it was the Dutch victimization survey and then the international, So maybe you can tell us also that story, because it's related also to the development of criminology and victimology. We could talk about the place we give to victimology later.
Well, you remember, there is a personal side to that. So I had developed the Dutch victimization survey, and we were the first in Europe, because the first national survey was done in 72, 73, long before the British victimization survey or any other survey. Well, there are historical little things that were done in Finland, in Finland, but that it doesn't amount to a national survey on crime in general. So we were really after the US, we were the first with a national survey covering common crime. Because we were policy oriented, with some differences with the American survey, because we always were very interested also in, did they report to the police? Were they happy with the police? That kind of question was never asked in the American survey. The American survey was really a statistical exercise, how to better measure crime. The Dutch survey from the beginning was a little bit more curious about what happened with the victims. And this is also clear in the publications, because one of my first international publications, the title was Going Beyond Measuring Crime. So I felt we will do things a little bit different from the American colleagues. Then after 4 or 5 years, the Central Bureau of Statistics in the Netherlands decided that they have the monopoly on statistics, and it had developed into a regular survey producing statistics, and they claimed, bring it over. This is our territory. You are a trespasser with your survey. And they took it over. Now, what happened with my ego? I said, gee, now I will do something else. I will continue with the survey, but I'll do it internationally. And that's why I approached Patricia Mayhew at the Home Office and Martin Killias in Lausanne, because we met in Strasbourg at the Council of Europe. So over drinks in Strasbourg, we said maybe we should work together on a standardized survey. I must say that England and Switzerland had already used the Dutch questionnaire as a building block for their own national surveys. So there were 3 surveys, and then I asked the Minister of Justice. This is really how it happened. I had drafted speeches for him, and I did a lot. Not what criminology usually doesn't. So I had some credit with the man, and I said, do me a favor now, you send a personal letter to all the ministers of justice of the EU, inviting them to take part in this wonderful idea of Ian van Dijk to do a survey. And that really helped a lot. So I'm sure this helped in Belgium.
I have to say that the Belgian crime victim survey was very much inspired by the Dutch one, indeed, but it was many years later. Just for the record, for our listeners, the first official nationwide survey was, I think, conducted for the first time in 1997. We had some local expertise in the 80s, but also very much inspired by the Dutch survey. So we kind of like used the Dutch example and started later on. So it was very influential. It's interesting to hear that it was influential a little bit in different parts of both continental Europe and the UK.
Yes. Also in Eastern Europe, I got a grant from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And that's how the first Polish and Hungarian, Serbian, all these countries have done surveys with funding from the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And continued with it, some of them, not all of them, but I mentioned Bulgaria and Poland because they still have a national survey. Certainly Bulgaria has regularly repeated, and that is basically the International Crime Survey, which was but also Japan has a survey that is repeated, and in Latin America we have had indirectly also a lot of we put our stamp also, I think, on many of the surveys in Argentina, but also in Brazil, and so on, and so forth. Empirical criminology, but with an international outlook, you could say. And let me repeat, Josine, a few years after me, did the same with the self-report delinquency study, which is still going on with under the leadership now of Ineke Haan, who I also see still a little bit as a Dutch criminologist, because she got her training at Tilburg University. The Americans will not know that, but I know it is to be true. She was one of the first sociology students at the Tilburg University.
So that is so they send the letters to these ministries of justice.
Personal letters, yes, with the signature on the personal letterhead and so on. Yeah, very formal. It's called a blue letter in the Dutch terminology. A blue letter, it means a letter that the minister himself takes seriously.
Ah, nice. Okay, and then the first survey was conducted. I know that there was a link also because Martin Killias was going to the WODC. He spent his first sabbatical. He was at the WODC and he speaks Dutch. There was a link there also with the methodology they used. You were the first to use Katie.
Katie, yeah, yes, correct. Yeah.
Computer-assisted telephone interview that Martin had tested in Switzerland. And if we talk a little bit about these methodologies of the surveys, because you saw everything, you saw all the changes when you started in 72 or 70.
It was face to face. It was face to face, and I remember that made it difficult to carry it out in some parts of Amsterdam because they were so dangerous that the interviewers didn't want to go, and so we need to do something else. The Bijlmermeer at that time, it was impossible to go there. It's unimaginable for a young generation, but some of the most touristy places in Amsterdam were no-go areas around 1980. The Newmarkt, where now all the people from all over the world have a coffee, you couldn't go. The police didn't dare to show their faces after 6 o'clock in the evening. So certainly interviewers didn't go there. And then I heard that there was in Amsterdam a company, it was called Interview, and they used Katie, and then I thought, but they sit in the room with the telephones, and why they can call Germany from there. And then we have with a few interviewers that we can control and check, we can do interviews everywhere without any train or flight costs. That was my brainwave. That I thought, this is it. So Katie for me was also immediately an opportunity to go international. That was much more difficult in reality. It couldn't be done from Amsterdam. That was not technically possible.
Not at that time.
No, not at that time. But still, you need to train your interviewers, and they need to be nationals. So it was a little bit naive. Yeah. But technically, you could do it. And I had this brainwave, like, this is, and it's not expensive either. But it's not how it happened. It's always done by local teams.
Yeah. I didn't know that there was this, because it is nowadays, because first I thought in the cost. Now it's very cheap to call everywhere in the world.
Yeah, it's even cheaper to do it with the web.
Yeah, I know. But the problem is that not everyone has the landlines disappear. But I didn't know that it could have been a good idea. But you would need people from every country. You would need to have interviewers, perhaps among the students that come from different. It's not so easy, but it would be a nice idea from Amsterdam. You could have the work.
That was my original idea from the Overtoom, where this center was. I thought, we do it from the Overtoom. Yeah.
And then they started, and that was like a window of opportunity, perfect window of opportunity, at least for 10 years until
exactly. And then it closed. It closed.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. And then the response rate started to drop. They're still dropping. and now it's all done on at least in the Netherlands and I think also in Switzerland with panels, pre-prepared panels, and then it's done on the website. And if they can't handle the website, they get a letter or a telephone call.
Yeah,
that's the new. So it's mixed method now. It's complicated, but you are absolutely right. It was indeed a window of opportunity of max 10 years. Then it was over.
Yeah, and but because now there is also this tendency to say, okay, we'll do it this way, and then we will weight the sample. Huh? But, okay, you can weight it, but because you can weight it, but it doesn't change the fact that some people are not answering. So, what the panel seems a good solution, but the things that are put online simply. Do you have any opinion about that?
Well, we tested it with the Max Planck Institute.
I remember, that's why I asked. Because
so we tested it, and at that time, our conclusion was that people, you have, of course, the bias, because people that use the internet, almost by definition at that time, were not a sample of the population, but a very skewed sample of young and higher educated. That has changed a little bit now, but at that time that was very much the case. But apart from that, there is also a mode effect, and that is that people in the total anonymity of their own screen, they bullshit a lot more than when they have an interviewer or even if a man or a woman on the phone talking to them. So you tend to get more extreme answers. And what is an extreme answer in a victimization survey is that, yes, I have been robbed, and after that I was raped. And people that want to be interesting, they start to exaggerate. And that was my feeling of the first pilots we did, that there was more noise in the answers, noise that inflated the rates, which is very dangerous, of course, for a victimization survey.
Yeah, of course. This is a major point you're raising. For example, at one university, they had this survey about life in the campus, and there was some extreme answers. And I thought, this is a little bit weird to have these answers. So I didn't remember that you have already found that at that time, these extreme answers.
Yeah, I also, of course, my advice to criminologists when they do big surveys is always consult the real expert, not the criminologist. Consult the people who make a living out of drawing the samples, doing that's their business. So of course they know, because for them it's a matter of survival. There's enormous competition, and they told me at the time, also on attitudinal questions. So do you like this politician? And then with a Likert scale, you get much more extremes in the answers on the web than in a face-to-face or a KT. That was known in the literature at that time. I'm not following it up now on a daily basis.
Yeah, but
I knew that already.
Yeah, but Jan, you should write. I know you wrote many things, but this practical knowledge, things that people must keep in mind when they do victimization surveys, because now, as it is easy to put a survey, I get from my university once a week, maybe twice a week, one survey, because there is another department that was created, and so they want to know. And this is all done very quickly, because it's easy to use an app, an app, an app, and then put something, and then you put the questions, and in a few minutes is done. But all this knowledge in a concrete way, for example, United Nations did this manual on how to run victimization surveys, but I think you were not at that time. You were not really, or no longer there.
No, I was not. No, but I was in a big, not a fight, but an argument with UNODC that I said if countries do a survey for the first time, please use the standardized methodology of the ICVS, because otherwise you get a survey done in Chile or in Zambia, and they develop it from scratch, and they have their own questionnaire, and then the results are totally, and that manual doesn't make that point. So I said, okay, if you don't make that point, for me it's a useless manual. And I still think, and this is fortunately there are still countries that approach me. Also the commercial companies, if they do a victimization survey, I usually get consulted, because they know that standardization is key. And if they don't, the reports have little impact. If you can't compare with the situation 5 years ago, and not with your neighboring country either, what does it mean that you have 40% victimization of percent? What can the politicians do with that? Very little.
Yeah, this issue of comparisons, of course, I consider you also one of my mentors, because I was with my mentor was Martin Killias at the University of Lausanne, but then I was lucky enough to find you quite quickly, and then we conducted research together, and I learned a lot from that. And there was this interest. You, Patricia Mayhew, Martin Killias, for this comparative stuff, and you told me before that you have been working on this issue of comparisons, of writing about the need for comparative research. I'm convinced, but maybe you could say something to the listeners.
That I can also personalize a little bit. My father was worked for the largest trading company of the Netherlands. So tobacco, all these kind of things. A little bit the colonial tradition of the Netherlands. So he worked, and I always, as a child, I was always fascinated by the annual reports of his trading company, where I saw this all kinds of beautiful graphs, the lemons and the oranges with colors, how much tobacco they had got from there and how much from there. So I was always fascinated that there is a whole world where they use the same products and to compare. That is really a childhood memory. Also the graphics. I was fascinated by these comparative graphics with the beautiful colors. And some country that was really came out of the orange was a huge part. So that is the root of my interest in this, is really these beautiful graphs. And I always, as you will know, from the first, I have always published victimization rates, comparative rates with the diagrams. This is my childhood imprint. That's what I wanted, as many countries as possible, in the diagrams. Yeah. So that was done, and I always felt, it's very strangely, I thought this is the most interesting type of criminology that you can imagine. But soon I found out I was very much alone with that idea, because most criminologists are much more interested in evaluating a new little program in their local prison or an innovation of their local police station. That's their kind of criminology, the little projects evaluating local issues. And this comparative perspective that you find in French sociology, and also in French and partly also Italian criminology in the 19th century, that has disappeared. That's a question by itself. It's partly maybe because of critical criminology, who always argue this is totally impossible because crime is a cultural bound issue, is a construction. It's and every country has its own construction, social construction, so you cannot compare. Maybe that is one of the reasons. But I was always a little bit disappointed by the lack of interest from the peers. There was always interest from the media. And that is unfortunate, because the media always want to say the crime is more of a problem in our country, and that's because of the leading political party. So we use it. And then the political party, of course, was not happy with that. My latest report, to tell you a secret, this stays among criminologists in the iPod. My last report was about a country in the Caucasus. Well, it was Georgia. Let's be open about it, because we are researchers. It was never published because it showed crime was not going in the right direction under the new administration, and this cost me endless discussions. They tore apart the methodology of that survey, of course, but they didn't like the results. So it's only available on my own website.
That's good to know. We will put the link later.
Yes.
I mean, well, Durkheim, la sociologie comparée et la sociologie elle-même. So comparative sociology is sociology itself. That was the tradition, as you mentioned at the beginning. I'm a fan. I've been doing the Council of European Statistics for 20 years, and we are now working on which will be published in 1 month. And I also love these graphs and the maps. And I think that sometimes when the media intervenes, at the beginning we were very reluctant about giving a lot of publicity to the publication of the report. But then what happened, contrary to what I thought, is that, for example, 1 year Belgium did not answer, and then the press said, Belgium is not answering. And since then, they are answering every year. And a couple of times when I had...
They had something to hide. That's what the press said.
Probably.
And then a couple of big countries that were delayed, they say, okay, I cannot wait anymore. Just be prepared for the reaction of the press. And then suddenly, 1 day later, in one case, the same day, one big country that I will not mention, but a big country of Europe, I got the report, the answer the same day. So in the end, these comparisons were positive, but in the case of the ICVS, I think it was not that case, because the latest one created some. The publication of the latest, the one that was done in 2005, the latest big wave of the ICVS was delayed a little bit. I remember it was the time of tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime, and the UK was still a little bit high. It was the crime was going down, but it was
that is also an issue. No, but there are endless issues. We had in New Zealand the first survey in New Zealand. New Zealand came out very high on violence, and it was an enormous shock. And then the minister, stupidly enough, started to point his finger to the Maoris in the country. He had to resign the next month. It was the end of his career. So victimization surveys, they are politically explosive. But the world should get used to that, because they may be explosive, but they're also truthful. They tell you what's going on.
Perhaps these reactions that these extreme right-wing parties appearing everywhere is because sometimes the information is hidden to the public. There are some issues that are not mentioned, and then you get someone who says, I'm going to tell you the truth, and this has some support. But I don't know, maybe I'm going too far. In any case, so you worked at the WODC, then you launched the ICVS, but you also did research from international, because you were at UNICRI, at one moment.
Well, UNODC first, yes, and later UNICRI, but they are related, of course, to each other.
And how did this happen? How criminology got to United Nations or the victim surveys?
That's an interesting case. the executive director of UNODC at the time was a Italian criminologist, or at least mafia researcher, Pino Alacchi.
Pino Alacchi, yeah.
And he had heard of me. So he basically gave me a call and said, would you like to join? And for various reasons, there were also push factors. The Buikhuizen affair, as we call it, made me a little bit uncomfortable in my own home country, because I was an advocate for Buikhuizen, not because I want to do biosocial research, but because I was morally upset by the ostracism of him. So for me, it was a freedom of speech issue, but I felt a little bit uncomfortable, as other people. So the idea to go abroad was attractive. So that's how I ended up there, but it was not, Alacchi was very much opposed to the victimization survey. So I had, that was unfortunate. So we had to find ways to continue it, but keep it out of his sight, because he wanted exclusive focus on the mafias of the world. Exclusive. And he measuring burglary or street robbery. For him, that was child stuff. He didn't take that seriously at all. So in that respect, it was I had to do it a little bit on the side in my UN years, and I must say also at the UN, measuring crime is politically very sensitive. So the same problem.
No.
And it's partly also a problem for the EU, I think. The EU, of course, should sponsor a standardized Europe-wide or EU-wide victimization survey. That I think everyone we all agree.
Yeah.
But it doesn't happen.
No, it doesn't happen. It's very strange, because there are other European surveys, like the European Social Survey, which is conducted every second or every third year. I don't remember by heart, but which is very successful, and it even has some questions on fear of crime, but very basic questions. You know, the typical question.
They are not the right questions. No.
No, absolutely not. But it's strange that, I mean, this is financed. There's a lot of money going to the European Social Survey, and they have a fantastic methodology, but if this methodology could be applied to the study of crime and victimization, it would be great. I mean,
yeah, and nowadays we could, because we have so much knowledge, we could do it with an abridged questionnaire, because we know exactly what works and what is most interesting. And of course, cybercrime needs to be part of it. I hand this over to the younger generation.
Yeah. But maybe this is a story that needs to be told, and as you are here, because what happened was, it was the fourth wave of the ICVS, or fifth wave, sorry, in 2004, 2005. It was published in 2007, 2008. And at that time, there was a kind of break. And then, but 2009, you remember, Eurostat, so you asked Heuni to make to try to develop a EU questionnaire, and they created the basis, and then we intervened, University of Tilburg and me at the University of Lausanne, and we tested that pilot. We found it was a team with Jan van Kesteren, Patricia Mayhew, and Antonia Linde. The five of us worked a lot on that. We had meetings at Eurostat.
Luxembourg, yeah.
In Luxembourg, yeah, exactly. And there were these, I mean, it's very difficult, because for some countries, the important thing is the regions. For Italy, for example, it's important to have a big sample to compare the regions. And then at that time, Jan, we were worried, because they said this will take place in 2013. And we thought, we're going to have a big gap between 2005 and 2013. And then the moment it was already pre-approved, it went to the parliament, and there was an opposition. I think it was from the English party that supported. Sorry?
From the UK, yes.
Yeah.
The UK, yes. Yes, there was a European member of parliament from the Conservative Party who bluntly said, I don't see the point where, because we have the British Crime Survey. It was a very unbelievable, stupid remark for an EU-wide survey to say we have already a British survey. But there were other issues also. It was expensive because of the huge sample sizes that were forced upon us. Indeed, by Italy and others. In Romania, we had to use the face-to-face interviewers because these people needed to keep their employment and so on and so forth. There were many other problems, which made it much more expensive than when you would outcontract it to one of the top comparative survey companies. There aren't that many, but they are still active in Europe. They can do it for much less money. And then our idea, you remember, Marcelo, was then we have a group of criminologists as advisors, and they can also write the reports. It was a tragic disaster, a train wreck. The vetoing by the parliament was a train wreck, and then it was very difficult to rehabilitate the corpse because it had been tried, it failed. Well, it's not because of a lack of effort on my side, but I couldn't get life back into that corpse.
Yeah. No, it's incredible that it is just stupid intervention one day, and that changes the history a little bit of victimization surveys in Europe. We could have had now for 10 years a victimization survey, maybe every 2 years, I don't know, and it was blocked. And now, we have tried several instances, and now Catherine Weilevel, who will also be on our podcast soon, she's launching it again. We're trying to launch it again, but we
try to launch.
Yeah. You are also involved, and I am also involved in that group.
Yeah.
Of course, yeah.
But the strange thing is that almost every year I get an invitation to do the survey for instance, in the Caucasus, usually with money from the EU. So it's not that they don't see the utility. They think it's very important for an emerging democracy to do a survey, but not in the EU. That's very paradoxical, though.
It's very surprising also because they had invested a lot in the pilot, in all the testing, and then go back like that. It's really frustrating. Let's see if this. Our battle now will.
Well, you know what the best thing for a comparative crime survey is that is when crime goes up.
Yeah.
So with cybercrime now becoming a real issue, certainly in the Netherlands. It becomes the main priority of law enforcement. Maybe that's another window of opportunity in the foreseeable future.
Yeah, and we had already introduced a couple of questions there, even if smartphones is 2007, the first iPhone. We could have followed the increase a little bit, maybe not perfectly, but at least with something. But that's the way it is. And so going back to criminology, and you did a lot. You're also one of the founders of the International Society of Victimology.
Mm-hmm.
How do you see the link between? I mean, it's not important what I think. The link between criminology and victimology, is it a part of criminology? Is it a different field? How do you see it?
Well, that's a very good question, because when the society was established, it was a meeting in Münster in Germany, partly for historical reasons. And then there was a debate, and I was part of that debate because there were people who said victimology should be a notion within criminology. It adds a dimension to criminology, but you should not make it a standalone discipline. because then you lose sight of the many interrelations with the other side, with the offender side. And I must admit, I was on that side in the debate. So I said, why do we need a society of victimology? Although I became the president later on, but at that time I said,
against your will.
Is this because you want new posts for ourselves, or why not make it a division within this International Society of Criminology, which at the time was a big, very powerful organization? That was my position. So I believed in that you should study also the interaction with the offenders, but also if you want to improve the services and the rights for crime victims, you cannot ignore that there is also in the criminal justice system, of course, another side. If I see now what happens, I see that the European Society of Criminology has a vibrant
working group,
permanent workshop on victimology.
Yeah.
The American Society of Criminology has a vibrant division on victimology. I see that victimology is now in Canada, in Montreal, popular within the School of Criminology. I see that victimology is now, fortunately, knock wood, again booming in the Netherlands within the NSCR, which is an institute on the study of crime and law enforcement. So you see that in that institutionally, victimology has come back to criminology. There are very few active victimologists at now who argue for an independent victimology, but there were 20 years ago several in the US, in Germany. There was really this idea of Benjamin Mendelssohn, one of the founding fathers, who wanted to have an independent, standalone victimology, the science of victims. I think that era is closing down now, and I see that it is again coming back to the mother discipline, which is criminology. So I myself define myself as a victimological criminologist, or a victim-oriented criminologist, and I am known. I agree also in my own country, because I'm the founder of Victim Support, the Netherlands. So I'm known as a victimologist, but I feel myself as a criminologist with a special interest in victimology. So that's I have I have a clear concept myself about that. And again, historically, that is also was an interesting debate from the very first hours of the World Society of Victimology.
Yeah, and then, well, of course, you also taught victimology at the University of Lausanne. One thing I regret is that at the time we were not recording the classes. But perhaps this is one project that we could do sometime soon, because what could be better than to have you teaching criminology for some hours? I mean, it cannot get better. So I think that this could be done with you and with a few of the founding members of the ESC, that to create like ESC, European Society of Criminology, to create some classes, because all this knowledge must be kept somewhere, and the students were very happy with you at the University of Lausanne. But this is something that we can discuss later. Let's see if it's an idea I have. Let's see if it works. And just to go back a little bit.
My last lectures were at Leiden University, we're in Belgium.
Yeah. Okay. But these are in Dutch.
That was after Lausanne. Yeah, it was nice.
This was in English or in Dutch?
No, that was in English.
Okay. Yeah. This exists. Okay,
where? In the master program at Leuven.
At Leuven, okay. Yeah.
Theoretical criminology.
Yeah, okay. Then one thing that you mentioned about criminology in the Netherlands, you mentioned this the growth of WODC and then later the NSCR, but you also mentioned that in the 80s, these places that are now very nice places to visit for the tourists were very dangerous places. And that changed. So it means that the criminal policies that were introduced did something, They worked.
Yes. to the extent that they were maybe even self-defeating for criminology. We just discussed that it's difficult to raise money for a victimization survey if crime is no longer a top concern. And this is indeed, I think the theoretical framework of the research unit at the Home Office in the UK and of WODC, as you call it, and we call it, the theoretical frame was opportunity theory or routine activity theory, as the Americans call it, which is a very weird name. I much prefer opportunity theory. So the idea was that, of course, you need a criminal justice system, but you should also persuade the public and the business community to reduce the opportunities of crime by situational crime prevention or social crime prevention. That was the basic philosophy or theory of this policy-oriented criminology of the 80s. And indeed, I think there is strong, really very strong evidence that situational crime prevention measures have been booming across the world, the industrialized world. But even in China, for instance, also there is much more crime prevention now than there was 30 years ago. And that indeed has had quite an impact on the level of common crime, on burglary, on car theft. That's almost disappeared, car theft, but also on other types of crime. So I think indeed that the fall of the level of common crime across the Western world is partly the result of knowledge-based, criminological knowledge-based policy making.
Yeah.
Yes, that's. I think there is a strong case to make there.
Yeah.
That criminology has really made an impact. Much more, for instance, sociology, and that may also explain a little bit why criminology is much more flourishing than sociology. But sociology didn't have much of a lasting impact on policy making.
Yeah, and Ian, how these ideas, because you are doing the survey since the beginning of the 70s, and you wrote about opportunity, but then the idea was formalized through first Gottfredson, Hindelang, and Garofalo, I think it was, with the lifestyle theory.
Exposure, yeah.
And then routine activities by Felson and Cohen. But how did you interacted with these people? I know you interacted. And how was it that this situational crime prevention, then Ron Clark also, how did it work?
Ron played an important role, but he emigrated to the US, as you know. He went to John Jay, and also there are personal Rutgers.
Yeah.
Sorry, Rutgers.
No problem.
Yeah, Rutgers. There is another personal factor, and that is that Michael Hindelang, that I got to know him at this Münster symposium, but he was already very ill at that time, and he died very, very young. So he was one of the most promising criminologists of our generation, but he passed away at a very early age.
Yeah,
and that left a bit of a vacuum in victimologically oriented criminology in the US. It's really true. He had his co-authors, but he was really the leader of the pack. So sometimes these things have an impact on the development of a discipline, I think.
Yeah, this person. I mean, some people play a key role, and then they disappear. Yeah, Travis Hirschi told me that they were. Because for my PhD, I use a lot their book Measuring Crime. Yeah. And then the moment when I had the opportunity to discuss with Hirschi, unfortunately they didn't record the interview, but I spent the whole afternoon discussing with him, and I use it a lot for my PhD. And he said, I'm not proud of that book, which was very disappointing for me because of the way in which the sample was weighted, because it was a small sample that was multiplied. But he explained to me that Hindelang was already ill and they wanted to publish because they knew he was going to die. sort of brain tumor, something like that. So it's really a pity. But this Münster symposium that you mentioned is not the same for the creation of the International Society of Victimology, eh?
It's the
So,
same.
it's the same.
It was, I think, the last conference that Michael Ingelang attended in Europe, and he was not interested in the foundation, or I may mix things up, but in my recollection, it was both organized by Schneider.
Yes.
In Germany.
Schneider. Yeah, he also played he was coming to the ESC conference for many years. He came until he died, probably. So that's another. And also Richard Sparks was there active. Not the Richard Sparks that is now at Edinburgh, but the other Richard Sparks who did.
Yes. The older one. Well, he did the first victimization survey in the UK together with Hazel Genn, who unfortunately became a sociologist of law, and became very, very well known in that capacity. But she was lost for criminology. Hazel Genn and Sparks did the first victimization survey in the UK.
Yeah, but I mean, there were networks, because people think that networks is something new and that now because we can connect through the internet. But already at that time, there were international conferences and people getting together.
Yes, and certainly the Council of Europe played a prominent role, because there was an annual conference in Strasbourg organized and funded by the Council of Europe. And they always invited at least two criminologists from each member state of the Council of Europe. And that's also why Poland was a member of the first ICVS, because I met a Polish criminologist, and and that was in the communist time, the first ICVS. He organized a small survey in Warsaw, because we knew each other from Strasbourg. And it's a great pity that in a moment of unwisdom, the Council of Europe decided to abolish these conferences to save money. There was also a scientific council for many years that was also abolished already. And now it's history that there were even those conferences. But this was an annual get-together also of young criminologists. And that's where I met Martin, met Mayhew, Polish guys. There were always two people from the US. The French were very active in that setting, also probably because it was in France. So Cés Diep was always there. So it was really the Scandinavians were there, of course. Very profitable, because you bring together some young criminologists, and there was no European society, of course. That I also want to emphasize. But the interesting thing was that it was, of course, also policy oriented, because the Council of Europe used it to set the agenda for their policy making, for their new recommendations, and so on. So it was linked to policy making in Europe more than the European society.
Yeah, it's very difficult to trace the history of the Council of Europe. All the people of your generation always talk about these conferences. There was a Greek lady,
Aglaia Tsytsoura.
Yeah. Thank you for remembering the name. Yeah. Apparently, and she came to the first meetings of the ESC, and I discussed with her, but this was before the idea, 20 years before the idea of having this podcast. Unfortunately, she died because she played a key role. She was very interested in criminology.
I think she had a degree in criminology, a French degree. Certainly, she had a French degree in social research, and maybe even in criminology. And she was indeed the anchor of all these criminological interests. She was always there. She was very committed. She was one of those ladies. We had Irene Mellop at the UN in those days, and we had Aglaia Tsytsoura in Strasbourg. You could also always rely on them. Very good organizer, very dedicated person, yes. And that function is no longer there. Because
No, also because I mean there were two phenomena. I think first the Council of Europe at that time was mainly Western Europe and some Central Eastern European countries, but then as it became bigger and bigger,
yeah,
it became more difficult to handle, and also the growth of the European Union meant that some resources that previously were going to the Council of Europe probably went to the European Union.
yeah, I would say particularly human resources. The ministries were less of the EU lost a little bit of interest in the council because they had another forum.
Yeah.
It's not that money was transferred from Strasbourg to Brussels, but it was certainly true that for a Ministry of Justice, the meetings in Brussels became much more important, of course. That's where the decisions were taken that were really of direct political interest. And then, that indirectly, Strasbourg became a little bit less pertinent for them, politically pertinent. That's what happened.
This is a major information that you're giving, because the persons that did not see that, it's difficult to imagine that at that time, because it was always, when you see the resolution, it's always the Committee of the Ministries of Justice. But
Yes.
at that time, it was, the place to be.
I remember that I accompanied the Minister of Justice, the man of the letter. I accompanied him to meetings in Strasbourg. These were important meetings for the Minister of Justice. They went for 2 days to Strasbourg every year to discuss an agenda of policy issues.
Yeah.
Not only criminal law, but also family law and other topics. And now, of course, Brussels is for them the number one priority for international meetings.
Yeah. The lucky thing is then the ESC, the European Society, was created, and at least we have a forum for European criminologists. But as you mentioned, of course, at that time it was much more criminal policy oriented. So do you think that now that crime is, especially let's say cybercrime, you see that as probably an opportunity for empirical criminology to take the lead a little bit more, no?
It's not only cybercrime. I have the feeling that there is violent crime, also extreme violent crime by very young people, is an emerging issue too. So yes, I think the political interest in our discipline is likely to grow in the coming years.
You told me once, we discussed this, about these cycles. That you said that when you were studying crime was always going up, then it went down, and of course, situational crime prevention surely played a role. And what could have happened now with these extreme violent crimes? Because it's not only, I mean, I agree with you that there is a risk of this kind of violent crimes going up. Do you have any hypothesis about this? What could have happened?
You know, one of my favorites was that a lot of violence is beer related. That's why I was hated by the Heineken company here. I once gave a lecture in Australia, and it was all over the TV. They didn't like it because they are an ordinary bloke in Australia drinks beer, of course. Wine is for the snobs. So they didn't like it in Australia. And when I was back at Schiphol Airport, the first call I got was from someone from Heineken Brewery, whether I was out of my mind. Yes. So no, it's no longer beer. I cannot say that because the alcohol consumption is going down among young people. Fortunately, they drink zero alcohol beer is extremely popular now. Heineken makes a lot of money from zero alcohol beer. But I think this is really sociology. I think we have a new era of alienation of a younger population from the established institutions, norms, and values. School dropouts. They can make much more money in the drug market, of course. But I think it's a kind of alienation from the dominant culture, more than maybe a long time before. That's how I feel it. These young people are totally disconnected, and they yes, they do crazy things at very young age, which is scary. Yeah, you need sociological criminologists for that. I don't think that they are necessarily have all mental problems or something. I don't think so. It is cultural alienation primarily. Of course, there are many of them are also cognitively handicapped, but that's for me not a really driver, because there have always been people who are cognitively deprived. But this new phenomenon, it has to do something with our culture. Like, yeah, we can't absorb them somehow in mainstream society, and that's a sociological issue, of course.
Yeah, now this is quite interesting, because I mean, one thing that we always ask our guests is how crime changed during their lifetime, and your generation is particularly interesting because you lived half of your life with the old Europe and half of your life with the new Europe. You saw all these transformations, the changes also in society. Is it possible to give an overview of that, how crime has changed, and maybe how the social reaction to crime changed too?
We have the crime curve. It went up and up and up, and now it seems to go down and down. But now we have the end of the downward slope, I think, because of cyber, which really is a game changer. The personality profiles do no longer apply. Most of the theoretical frames do no longer. Lifestyle exposure theory doesn't apply anymore. It's all up for grabs at the moment, also theoretically. And of course, certainly in the urban areas in Europe and in my own country, in my own city, Amsterdam, the younger population is ethnic. That wasn't the case in the 70s. We had some people from Suriname, we had some Moluccans, but these were really minorities. They are no longer minorities. We are ethnically highly diverse city, and Rotterdam is the same. That is something to reflect on, and of course that is related to what I call a cultural alienation. That is of course also related to the enormous change in the ethnic composition of the urban populations. These things are related. That's why I said this is a sociological issue more than a psychological issue. And maybe for the future, Marcelo, I hope, I also said that in meetings with NSCR, I hope that sociology can make a bit of a comeback, because at the moment there is a clear the weight is on individual studies, on psychology, and much less on sociology. Yeah. Certainly in the Netherlands, I cannot really have a total overview, but in the Netherlands you can clearly see that the PhDs are very rarely sociological in perspective. I hope that we will see a comeback of sociological criminology.
Yeah, perhaps what happens is that sociology departments see criminology studies as a clear threat. I mean, it is a threat for them. I remember at the Cattolica University in Milano, they had like 20 professors of victimology and 2 in criminology, but most of the students were in criminology. And the growth of all these programs of criminology, in my opinion, also made that people identify with the criminology, and they don't want to be to do sociology of deviance. Yeah, but there is a work to be done towards. Robert Agnew wrote about this, towards unified criminology. But what I see is more a fragmentation with all these labels that are used now: green criminology, blue criminology. I think there is one criminology, and then we are inside. But there is this tendency to use, collective identities, which I do not share.
But also sociology has been fragmented. Yeah, into gender studies or ethnic studies. That is also fragmentation. Yeah. There is not in the Netherlands. There was a lot of grand theory sociology, Norbert Elias was extremely influential here in Amsterdam. There is not a trace left of that kind of sociology.
Yeah.
So the problem comes from both sides. We don't include these people, but also there are very few students in sociology, certainly in Amsterdam.
Yeah, now that you mentioned, there is a very good MOOC online by a Dutch sociologist, Bart van, okay, my pronunciation, Herikhuizen. Bart van Herikhuizen.
Herikhuizen, yes.
Yeah, okay. He has a MOOC. Probably you could take it in one of these, probably in Coursera or something like that. This is very, 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 very good. Only the first part is there, and so there is a tradition. And he met Elias in the Netherlands. You also met him, eh?
Yes, I met him. Yes, he was, but he was a guest professor in Amsterdam when I was a student. So I met him.
How? Because he was in the UK, but he moved to the Netherlands because everybody. No, I mean a few people that I know in the Netherlands, they talk about him. Did he move, or he was just a guest there?
He was a little bit more than a guest, but he was already more or less retired. But he also lived in Amsterdam. He had a flat in Amsterdam and many friends, and his books were translated also here. You should understand that he was a rather marginal refugee from Germany in the UK. I think when he had already published his opus in German before he became a refugee.
Yeah, exactly. It was 39. It was published in Switzerland because, of course, he was a Jew in Germany. It was very difficult to publish.
Yeah.
He moved in 33 to the UK. Then his parents came to see him and he said, don't go back. They went back. And then the second edition of the book is dedicated to them. He knows where one of them died, the other no. So it was terrible. And then the book was published in Switzerland. 39.
Okay. But did he even have a chair in the UK? I'm not so sure, but certainly not at Oxford or Cambridge. It was a difficult mode of living for someone who had already published a very important work before he emigrated to the UK. Yeah. And the reception in the UK was lukewarm, and he got a very warm embrace suddenly in the 70s from the people in Amsterdam.
Yeah, and also because his book was translated very late to English in the 70s, and I think because I've been trying to study this, the big comeback is when Crime and Justice, an annual review of research edited by Michael Tonry and at that time Norval Morris, they had this article in 1981 by another historian that I quote systematically, and I'm going to remember his name, and he introduces in criminology the civilization process because it was at the time of the increase of crime in the US, and Morris and Tonry, they knew this work, and they knew that crime in the long run, in the very long run,
from the Middle Ages on,
exactly, was going down.
He was already a little bit received in the Netherlands before the war, so his German work was known among the literati, the intellectual elite. They wrote about him and appreciated his work. Yeah. That was before the war, when it had not yet been translated. But before the war, reading and commenting on German and French books was quite normal in the Netherlands. That explains a little bit why he might have had a better reception in the Netherlands than in the UK, because his German books were known.
Yeah, these are things that are no longer known, and
Well, maybe they are also useless to know.
No. I mean, this is a legacy. I mean, it is quite impressive, and because also when people, I don't want to go over Elias alone, but also when people read him, they usually misunderstand him because Norbert Elias was saying, Yeah, but this can be destroyed by a regime based on propaganda. I mean, the basic instincts are there.
Yeah, and also the most important things in societies are often not observed by anyone. Yeah. That's also one of the messages of Elias. It happens gradually, and it's only the next generation that will understand what was happening, and you never know what's going on in your own life. Maybe this rise in the new populists is much more fundamental than we hope when we keep thinking. So that is a typically Elias idea, that these trends go unnoticed for a long time.
Yeah, I totally agree, because it also fits with the idea of gradual evolution over evolutionary time. And I think cultural anthropologists and cultural evolutionists also share the same view. Norbert Elias' ideas are very much, known among cultural and evolutionary anthropologists nowadays. So I think you may be very much right making a case that we don't observe while we're in it. We're in the moment, so we don't see the huge changes. Probably the next generation will see how didn't they see it coming. But it's very difficult because you're in the middle of the things happening. So
absolutely. Yeah.
And I think another big challenge is, for example, cybercrime. You said the theories, we need to adapt them, we need to change things. Also, rehabilitation. This is something that we discussed at the conference at the Council of Europe. How people who do cybercrime, usually, well, I'm overweighted. What you say is don't keep a lot of food in the refrigerator because then you will be tempted. But how can you live in this world, which is a hybrid world? We are now connected like that, then we go back to some sort of physical world, but then we connect all the time. For these people, what you cannot put them far from the instruments that they use to commit their crimes.
Yeah, that's true. Although I know that someone in the Netherlands is now doing research on how you keep you can make all these technical devices that you can use to hack less accessible. Now they can buy anything anywhere. You can buy the most sophisticated hacking software by just pushing some buttons. That could be made more difficult, I think. But this is just an idea. This is just an idea.
Mm-hmm. But I like this idea, but in that case, you are translating the traditional theories just to a new object. So
yeah, that's true.
I'm not sure to what extent. It's open for debate that the classical theories will remain used, because the theories will probably be adapted to new phenomena and applied differently. I think it's the criminological imagination we need to use our old, between brackets, frameworks and translate or operationally measure them to fit the new phenomena. Unstructured routines or opportunities exist online, offline.
You are always fighting the previous war.
Maybe
with the tactics and the strategy of the previous war, but you need, of course, totally new thinking. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
That's a good point. Fighting the previous war, because now also the speed at which things change. So you have seen all these changes, but now artificial intelligence, so quickly it's growing, and well, this changes a lot, everything, how knowledge is constructed, and it goes at the speed that you cannot control because it's already version 4, and yeah. So, do you have any thoughts about that? About a war run by
I leave that to my grandchildren. I will raise it with them. They know so much more. This is really their world. I have a grandson who hardly leaves his room, and he's quite a normal guy, but they are so obsessed with this gaming and things. It's also their social life, the game with friends, but they don't have to meet anymore. They can do it behind the screen. Yeah, it's hard to understand. Maybe it's not.
Maybe it's not.
Maybe it's not for us to come up with the new theories.
The new generation.
Yeah, the new generation. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we went through a lot of subjects. Really interesting. Are we missing something?
I think.
Maybe one thing. The prisons, because the Netherlands. I know you wrote about that some years ago. The Netherlands reduced the number.
Regressing to the mean, I call that. Yes.
Yeah.
Regressing to the mean. Yes, you're right. Yeah. Yeah, but yeah, okay. I think that what happened in the Netherlands is that we had to address the problems of international drugs trafficking. You cannot be a heaven in a bad world if the traffickers can decide to go to Schiphol Airport because the sentences are half of what they are elsewhere. That is not a good idea. So we had to adapt temporarily. But I think underneath, the criminal justice system in the Netherlands is still relatively benign. And that is, and I was right. I predicted that there would be a regression to the mean in the Netherlands, and that's exactly what happened. Because we are now, I think, well, you know more about that than I do, Marcelo. But
very
I think
low.
We are again very low.
Scandinavia and the Netherlands, Germany went down.
It was the same in the 1970s. That was also why Luke Hulsman thought, let's abolish that system anyway, because he saw that the number of prisoners in the Netherlands was lower than anywhere else, and it became lower by the year. He said, well, let's extrapolate from there to a country without a criminal justice system. That kept Hulsman optimistic, but now it's dropping again. A brief point that maybe I would like to raise is that I can say with full confidence that victimology is alive and kicking in the Netherlands. In terms of research, first with Intervic, now with a special group within NSCR, which is a powerful group, but also, I mean, the society, the Victim Support Netherlands organization is a huge organization with hundreds of staff. And I sometimes feel that we are a little bit exceptional. I know Belgium also has a lot of interest in victims, but absolutely, in many other countries in Europe, I don't have the idea it has reached the level that it has in the Netherlands. The public discourse about victims is very much alive. There is no politician who can ignore that agenda. And we have, well, as I said, we have a very powerful victim support organization. We have a compensation fund for victims that gives out awards to 10,000 people per year. And I don't know, I think we are a little bit exceptional in that. And that's for me, that's interesting. So why is that? And why is it still so underdeveloped in Southern Europe? At least that's my feeling. In Spain, in Italy. Yeah, you know more about Spain, probably.
My feeling is that, for example, in Spain, I mean, okay, victim support, one thing, and then there is some associations of victims, and in some countries, for example, in Spain, these were mainly for victims of ETA, the terrorist group, and maybe, not maybe, and they were politically placed, let's say, to the right part of the political spectrum. And, you know, the social scientists have a tendency to be on the other side of the political spectrum. And then I think they couldn't manage to find the connection there. And they saw the victims' associations as a risk for getting more extreme punishment.
The same happened in Germany. Germany is part of that league in that respect. And in the UK and in the Netherlands and in Sweden, that's not the case. It was more an extension of the welfare state or even of the probation office. who said we reach out to the offenders, let's also reach out to the other party. So this is a little bit maybe a peculiarity of Northwestern Europe.
Yeah, but you played a role in the creation of Victim Support Netherlands, huh?
Certainly, yes.
And that it was when you were at the Research and Documentation Center. How this idea came?
It has partly to do in the Netherlands with the resistance movement, because my teacher, Professor Nagel at Leiden University, was a very important hero of the resistance against the Germans, with a lot of interest also in the Holocaust. That is an important feature of Dutch society, that the memory of the Holocaust is very much alive from the 70s onwards, in particular, not right after the war, when everyone just wanted to rebuild the society and forget about all these awful things. But from the 70s onwards, it became a major issue in the Netherlands. And that is probably a source of inspiration for a victimology, as it is in Israel, where there is a lot of interest in victimology, always was. And it's obvious why. We are a little bit similar in that respect. And that cannot explain the interest in the UK. This is something more for continental Europe. It's also true, Marcelo, but I will not go into this. It's also true for myself that there is a special interest in my family for the resistance against the Holocaust.
The Holocaust, yeah.
So deep down, there is a layer where this plays a role in my country.
Yeah.
And also for me personally. But still, I also feel that maybe it is related to Protestantism and Catholicism. If I say Northwest Europe, we all know that this is also the Protestant part.
Yeah.
And this is not a topic that people like to discuss, because it very much looks like stupid idea of they being Catholic, us being Protestant, which is not at all my point, of course. Nevertheless, these religious traditions still have some impact, and I have the feeling that in the Catholic Church, in particular, you have this strong image of the victim as a passive sufferer, and not as someone that is a resilient and maybe even a polemical survivor. That's not a Catholic idea of a victim. I'm not saying it's the opposite with Protestantism, but I think this is part of the explanation for me that should be further explored. Their idea is okay, they are terrible victims, but that doesn't mean that they should be a party in the criminal trial. Let's keep them out of there. It's part of the Catholic tradition, I think. The Catholic stereotype of a sufferer who is a meek sufferer. That's a fundamental Christian concept, and it's not a bad concept at all. But it may inhibit some people in traditionally or conventionally Catholic countries to understand that the victim should become a real powerful player in the discourse, but also in the justice system. There may be something of that there.
It's a very nice interpretation, because we go back to Durkheim, and I love it. I grew up in
explanations, Marcelo. I said,
Sorry.
We need sociological explanations.
Yeah, yes. That I grew up in a divided family. There was the Swiss family were Protestants, and the Spanish and Italian family were Catholics, and so I was always exposed. And religion was more important. People would talk more easily about religion, and now I'm surprised. I use references to the Bible, and half of the students not get them, even if it was maybe it's cultural issue. I mean,
that's also true, Marcel. I had the same experience in Lausanne as I had at Tilburg University, which is traditionally Catholic university. The only students who immediately picked up when I made a reference to the figure of Jesus Christ and so on were the Muslim students. They have much more knowledge now even about Christianity than the traditionally Dutch families. Strange, very strange.
I use these ideas. I mean, I would say even if you don't, it doesn't matter if you are religious or not. But the myth, the founding myth is you are in a garden, you can eat everything, you can do whatever you like, but this tree. And what is the first thing they do? They eat the tree. They eat the fruit of the tree.
Wisdom.
So I always make jokes that if God has been a situational criminologist, he would have put a wall or something to avoid them to enter. But I'm the only one laughing when I'm making this joke. But I still do it because I think it's part of our culture, and I really enjoy this explanation that you give. Really, yeah, we can keep it. So I have been contacted by a victim association in Argentina. I am going to give a series of conferences in the next 2 weeks. What would you recommend me to do so I get this idea of making the victims powerful, because Argentina is mainly a Catholic country, basically. But I will try to keep this, and there is something else that you would recommend me to do.
Well, you should ask them, what does the word victima in Spanish?
Victima, exactly.
Victima. What does it mean?
Yeah.
Just give them that assignment.
Okay.
Associate. What do you feel? What does it mean, and what are your associations? Then they will find out that it means the sacrificed.
And I know your article about that is
exactly. But I know from my own experience, teaching experience, that it's a nice opening, because they will really say, that's an eye opener. So it's Jesus Christ, what it means, and what does Jesus Christ mean for us? What is suffering? What is the suffering of Jesus Christ? Is he protesting? Does he say, I want to speak up about this, or is he silent? You see, you bring them to their own imagery of, if they have any Christian knowledge. That, of course, is.
I still think something can be done, even if it's a tough time for religions. But that's a very good advice. Thank you, Jan. And Jan, really, it's always a pleasure talking to you. And you said so many interesting things today. You cannot imagine.
You have to clip. You have to clip.
No, but a lot of things really impressive. But yeah, really, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very, very much indeed. And I hope that people after listening will regain interest in both international, comparative, and sociological criminology. So thanks a lot.
Okay.
Thank you.
It was my pleasure. It was my pleasure. We'll meet again.
Yeah, we'll meet again.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Okay. Ciao.
Thank you.
Ciao. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for following Lieven and Marcelo's Criminology podcast. This podcast is edited by Eduardo Coco from the University of Lausanne. Our theme song is Seagull's Night, Noche de Gaviotas, composed by Gustavo Cantero, arranged by Tato Germano, and played by Tato and Gustavo with the voices of Sasha Conte and Alejandro Turco Gujot. Your hosts are Lieven Pauwels from Ghent University, Belgium, and Marcelo Aevi from the University of Lausanne, Switzerland. Cheers, and see you soon.